Our topics is there life for Turkmen Gas in this new situation, and what is Russia, Iran's expected, let's say the expected kind of actions to cut it down, Turkmen Gas, the cost, and how much the cost of talking about Turkmen Gas via Caspian Sea or via Iran, or using existing lines or a brand new pipeline. Europe really need this, or is there any kind of new thinking between USA and European Union to, like CDC, you remember, collecting everything, including the Turkmen Gas? What you know better than me. So then, if we just forgot something, I can ask some more questions, and maybe we can just complete the session getting your ideas about the new Israeli-Turkey approach, especially for that EastMed gas issue. Maybe we can just close down with this.
Okay, then I will start with a very simple statement. Europe does need gas, and it needs it immediately. By gas, I mean non-Russian gas. And secondly, the only source of pipeline gas that is available that can impact the European energy balance is gas from Turkmenistan. So I will address these points, but I'll start by saying why Europe needs gas. The answer is that very roughly, Europe imports about 150 BCM of gas from Russia routinely. However, the European Union has said it will phase out gas, Russian gas, by 2030, and it may have to do so much earlier in response to the dispute as to how the gas should be paid for. The Russians insist it should be paid in rubles. The European Union says it should be paid in euros or dollars, according to whichever contracts were originally signed. The problem for the Russians, of course, is that these currencies are no longer necessarily payable to Russia due to Western sanctions. Now, the first thing I'm going to have to say is I will make mistakes throughout the whole of this presentation when I use the word Europe. Sometimes it's clear I'm meaning the European Union. Sometimes it's meaning a much wider, broader area, which might include, for at one end, Turkey, and at the other end, my own country, the United Kingdom. You'll have to guess sometimes which one I'm meaning. I'm not trying deliberately to mislead. The most important thing is that the European Union really is serious, and it faces an extremely serious problem immediately. Where can it get extra energy supplies from? Well, the first thing is that I'm using the word energy now suddenly instead of gas. That's because it's the use that gas is put to, which is very largely electricity, not wholly, but largely. So electricity can be made up in other ways as well as gas. But even so, Europe faces a massive problem. Why? It can get some gas in the form of extra LNG, but that will take a little bit of time to ramp up from the United States and from Qatar. And in the longer run, it can look to new sources of LNG from East Africa. But it isn't something that turns on just like that tomorrow. And equally important, LNG is a competitive global market. So Europe would have to outbid other potential buyers, including, shall we say, Japan and China. So that's not automatic that that much extra will come. Some will, but not everything. there are other potential sources that might come fairly quickly. There's a lot of gas wasted from flaring and venting that, if you attach the right technology to it, would increase the flows from existing suppliers such as Algeria, which are generally considered not in a not very strong position to increase raw gas supplies. But again, it'll take a bit of time, a few months. So it brings you back to Turkmenistan. Why do I say it's the only pipeline source? I've addressed the non-pipeline, LNG, but pipeline is the standard way that Russia supplies, and it's the standard way that Turkmenistan, which is landlocked, of course, supplies its gas. It could do so in one very, very quick way, literally tomorrow, 24 hours. It has a swap agreement with Iran and Azerbaijan, covering about 2 BCM of gas. If that volume were to be increased, it could push more gas into Azerbaijan. Only problem is not very much. Maybe another 2 or 3 BCM if we're lucky. Why? Because it would have to go through the Iran-Azerbaijani pipe, which once was a very big pipe, but hasn't been maintained, and we don't really know what the capacity is. So in theory, it could reach Azerbaijan. And this is why I sometimes talk about the European energy balance. Gas doesn't need to reach Europe or the European Union to impact the European energy balance. It simply needs to reach any part that is accessible to Europe. So for instance, Turkey can play a major role in this. Any gas that can reach Turkey, any extra non-Russian gas that can reach Turkey, in effect, frees up gas that is supplied to Turkey in the form of LNG to go to other destinations. They can go to Europe, and I think they would go to Europe, but there is, of course, the rider that they go to Europe on commercial terms. So Europe has to bid for them. But since it's in the Mediterranean basin, it's likely that that will be the destinations. So you can more or less assume that in theory, if Turkey is importing routinely about 14 or 15 BCM of gas in the form of LNG, then up to that amount could be diverted to Europe if the same amount could reach Turkey through pipelines. That's what I mean by the European gas balance and the role of Turkey. Could you get to 14 or 15 BCM? In theory, yes. In practice, my guess is no, not for a little while. Firstly, you could get, as I said, another 2 or 3 BCM up into Azerbaijan, which would free 2 or 3 BCM of Azerbaijani gas to come to Turkey. Then you could think of a swap arrangement that would be Turkmenistan, Iran, Turkey. Why do I say this? Because the line between Iran and Turkey is underutilized. Routinely, it seems to be underutilized by about 3 BCM. There are suggestions at the moment that it might be underutilized this season on a seasonal basis by as much as 6 or 7. But I don't think you could count on 6 or 7 for a full year. So let's just be conservative and say 3 BCM, which seems a reasonable amount. So we're talking of getting perhaps 5 BCM coming from the Azerbaijani and the Iranian swaps, if the 4 countries concerned, Iran, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, can get together and just basically say, do it. But there's a bigger way of getting some pretty quickly, not immediately. The other two that I mentioned are immediate, just needs basically a political agreement and the guys in one room hammering it out and saying, yes, we'll do it. A slightly longer one would be to build a small new field connection pipeline offshore from Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan. In effect, the nearest producing area of Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan is 78 kilometers away from the existing gas gathering system that Azerbaijan has in the Caspian Sea. To lay a pipeline capable of carrying 5 or 10 BCM, frankly, is routine. The area has been surveyed at least twice and probably more. There are no technical problems. And the estimate for the cost and timing of such a pipeline is from the minute it got approval, maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe 4 months or so, and costing about $300 or $400 million. Nothing in terms of major international supply costs. Of course, there are several things that need to be done as well. The gas supply is there. The field that it would connect, and I ought to admit, I have a stake in this because I'm on an advisory board that is recommending such a project. The field would be the Maktumguli field operated by Petronas in Turkmenistan's waters. Much of the gas there is already being flared or even vented. And what goes to Turkmenistan goes to the Turkmen authorities for a minuscule rate that Petronas cannot make a profit from. The gas is in effect wasted. It would be immediate on construction or completion of the pipeline to be able to put in at least 5 BCM into the system, into the Azerbaijani system. And the Azerbaijani system has the capacity to handle that. We think it might take a further couple of seasons, perhaps 9 to 12 months, to raise that from 5 up to 10 or 12 BCM, but not terribly long.
Yeah.
The bottom line, though, is, do the Turkmens want to do such a thing? That really depends on whether or not the Turkmen government, under its new president, Serdar Bedi and whether the European Commission want to get together to discuss this seriously. But it's the only big volume that can go into Azerbaijan, and then partly because Azerbaijan wants some more gas itself for domestic use, and partly because there is still some spare capacity on the existing gas pipelines between Azerbaijan and Turkey, that kind of volume of gas can reach Turkey. What one has to say is that the Turkmens have always thought, why can't we have a really big project and sell 30 BCM of gas to Europe? And the Europeans have talked in much the same language from time to time. Well, yes, nice idea, but you would have to build an awful lot of new pipeline infrastructure to carry that gas onwards from Azerbaijan. It's not straightforward. Whereas the idea that we're proposing can be considered in two ways. One, it can be done, and it can be done at relatively little cost. And two, It is proof of concept that you can get gas from one side of the Caspian to the other that can contribute to resolving European energy problems. Now, there are some key points that need to be made. Azerbaijan has always said it would be a reliable transit partner, and there's no reason to doubt that. It has been doing that with Turkmen oil and indeed with some oil from Kazakhstan for 20, 30 years now. Not quite, no, ever since the BTC line opened in 2006. So all of these things show what is capable of being done in a relatively straightforward manner. I haven't addressed the political issues. I'll start with a simple political issue. Does Turkmen want to do this? Turkmenistan could do this, but it would have to have a slight change of domestic attitude, because it's always said that any gas that has to be exported should first be cleaned and processed in Turkmenistan. Well, that would either mean that they've got to bring the gas back from the middle of the Caspian Sea to the shore of Turkmenistan to the facilities, which defeats the object of the exercise because it adds another 300 kilometers of pipeline, or you have to check where the processing facilities could be put on the Petronas platform, or, of course, the simplest, you simply allow the processing to be done at the big Azerbaijani facilities at Sanctions. So there are technical issues like that. But as somebody pointed out the other day, those are the east-west dimensions of the Caspian. What about the north-south dimensions? In practice and in legal terms, there's absolutely nothing to stop this happening. But legality is not what we're really concerned with here. The question is, what is the kind of pressure that countries like Russia or Iran might wish to bring upon the problem to stop it? I don't think Iran would. For one reason, Iran has got at least one field, which it says Sadr Jangal should be developed in the Caspian, a major field. It would want to develop that itself. And for that to happen, it wants to have relative peace and tranquility in the Caspian Sea and doesn't want to be up at odds with its neighbors, including Azerbaijan, with which it's trying to improve relations. It's also seemingly trying to normalize relations with Turkmenistan. The other point is that really it's Russia. If you're Turkmenistan these days, how do you view the war in Ukraine? You don't refer to it. You avoid it. It's as if you pretend it doesn't exist, it's not taking place. You don't like use of even of the word crisis when it comes to talking about European energy. And yet, you both suffer from it and can sense an opportunity. You suffer from it because you worry, does this mean that if Russia should succeed in Ukraine, it'll try to reimpose its empire elsewhere, even though you've got two countries between you and Russia. You've still got some Russian forces, I think, in Turkmenistan on the border. Secondly, you are still to do much, perhaps to a greater degree than any of the other former Soviet republics, in a kind of Soviet mindset. You think of Moscow as the center. Whether this is true of the new president, who after all has lived most of his life in a post-Soviet world, is a different matter. But you have to take, it's reasonable to take the question of Russia into account. My own view is that if ever there was to be a Trans-Caspian link, this is the point at which Western guarantees, Western involvement perhaps in the project, would be crucial. And not just Western. If that gas was going to Turkey, then old Turkish connections between Turkey and the Caspian would play, I think, a very significant role. We've seen the close relationship between Turkey and Azerbaijan in terms of the support for Turkey, that Turkey has given Azerbaijan in questions concerning Nagorno-Karabakh. And yet we've also seen Turkey move very quickly and strikingly to improve relations with Armenia, to keep things on an even keel, try to make sure things are stabilized. I see no reason why Turkey should not be trying to do exactly the same thing with regard to the Caspian, particularly if much of that Turkmen gas was going to Turkey. So if I stop there, I'll let Cenk ask some questions and I'll be able to grab a sip of coffee.
Yeah. Please, you can do it. So thank you very much, John. It's a very clear and full of, let's say, the doable, and what is doable and what is not doable at the moment. We are just seeing that. And before Ukrainian war, Mr. Putin also show up in Kazakhstan, we know. And that changes is not a simple thing. It is just a kind of show of Putin by saying that, don't think that I am just forgetting anyone inside that Central Asia, doing something by just turning around the Russia. So this is why I guess Turkmenistan has got the nice message from him as well. And you are just rightly mentioning that there is no technical problems. It has to be, we need a kind of support, a kind of political agreements on the table, and try to utilize first of all, the idle capacities by constructing first a kind of offshore pipeline maybe between Turkmenistan and Sangachal, then from Sangachal to Turkish border, then inclusion in the TANAP or using the idle capacity of BOTAŞ system. Main problem is in here, that is the Western line. West line, Balkan line, is empty right now because of Turk Stream. They just put everything to the seabed and it is empty. But we know that Gazprom has some, let's say, the ownership issues along the route. And they don't want to see at the moment to have a kind of working Western line reverse to Ukraine, I think. But at the end of the day, European Union and Turkey and all the producers will be talking about that line because it is there. It has to be utilized. Even you import US LNG to Turkish shores, LNG regasification terminals or Greeks, it doesn't matter. You have to use this line. So this is why, what is your opinion about this, especially for that Western line? Utilization of Western line by using TANAP, by using BOTAŞ idle capacity or LNG capacity, a minor kind of 185 kilometers length pipeline from Thrace region to Bulgarian border of Turkey to Western line. So are you expecting Europe just put his hands on the table and by saying that after that Russia-Ukraine war, we would like to convince Gazprom to forget about some of the ownership issues, especially in Moldova or whatever, in Ukraine, I don't know. My personal view is that Mr. Putin keep an eye Nord Stream 2 certification and up and running pipeline system between Russia and Germany. So this is why he has to give something to the European Union, and I am expecting he will be okay with the 14 BCM or 15 BCM, whatever the source is, Iran or Turkmen or whatever, or extra Azeri gas or Iraqi gas or Israeli gas, because it is just quite a number not bother Russia, 14 BCM or 15 BCM. What is your opinion on that?
I'm going to be very boring about the TransBalkan Line. I agree with everything you've said. I think there is a question about putting it into commission for the full length. We heard today that the Russian military appear to have asked for the rather strange Russian military units in Transnistria to be on the alert as if they're trying to threaten Ukraine from its western side. And I believe that one element of the TransBalkan Line goes through Transnistria. So there is a question of actual physical control over the line. But first of all, in principle, I think you're right. It is one of the logical ways of supplying gas into Ukraine, as well as the routes that come in from Slovakia and Hungary. It's also a practical way of getting gas into Europe via Bulgaria, via Romania and the Romanian systems. One of the things that we have been doing, but still too slowly, is completing a whole set of minor interconnections between Balkan countries. Connections between Romania and Hungary, connections between Romania and Bulgaria, connections between Bulgaria and Turkey and Greece. All of these have been started, done, implemented in many cases, but at relatively small levels of capacity. We really need not much bigger systems, but instead of being able to carry 2 or 3 BCM at these points, we need them to be able to carry 5 or 10 BCM, so that you can really move gas around Southeast Europe. Why? Because Southeast Europe is the one area that really does need both gasification in order to help the climate crisis, and because of its very high dependence on Russian gas, in some cases 100%. So you need the flexibility of the system. So all I would add to what Cenk was saying about using the TransBalkan is make sure you do the ancillary projects as well. And these are small projects that in physical terms only take a few months, sometimes only weeks to implement, but you need to do them. If you want to have one classic example, I'm trying to think whether, I think it was the 2009 Russian-Ukrainian gas cutoff, when the emergency system for reversing flows from the Czech Republic to Germany, I think they managed to do that in a matter of days, in a matter of weeks, and possibly only in a matter of days. When they were desperate, they did it. And we're now desperate now, so we need to do these things. But the West Balkan Line does make sense. Add it to the existing Turkish terminals for LNG, the proposed new terminal Turkey is thinking about, the Greek terminal at Alexandroupolis, and you have got a way of getting American LNG into Central Europe, which is one of the areas that needs it. So, yeah, I think the reversal of the line, as to the EU's attitude, this needs to be robust. It needs to be put on their agenda as a quite specific approach to improve the energy security of Europe. This has been suggested before, but it probably will get considered in a slightly bigger frame, which is namely, what do you do with the whole of the former Gazprom-owned delivery system in Europe including the big brotherhood lines that serve Central and Western Europe, because it's all of that network that we now need really to put into reverse.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much, John. Your points are very important. When I was in BOTAŞ, I visited Bosnia and signed an MOU in 2002 when I am just working for Nabucco as well. So we are also talking about when I was a part of TAP, EIP pipelines for that Adriatic countries, including Albania. So small connections is always important, and there's a need of infrastructure. There is no big kind of consumption target maybe in the Southeast Europe, but it is not less than 19-20 BCM. So you have to connect, as you rightly mentioned, that system to each other by having the alternative sources rather than the Russian gas. Otherwise, it is meaningless. You can just increase the capacity for the more Russian gas. So this is why Turk Stream second line will be a kind of, let's say, a kind of struggle for Europe or not. I am not sure in this sense, because they are aiming at to have a Serbian connection and just a kind of laying another Nabucco to reaching out Austria via another angle, just using Serbia, Hungary to Austria as well. So still the Russian gas will be in there, especially for the Southeast Europe. And if Europe would like to be increasing their kind of, let's say, convincing environment in the Union, they need to do something for diversification of the Southeastern European countries, I think. So, and in this sense, TANAP and TAP will be playing a crucial role, but I am still thinking that BOTAŞ can have, together with Azerbaijan, together with Turkmenistan, it doesn't matter, but will be the player in the infrastructures as well. They need to construct the infrastructures all together and sending the gas, because Turkey also have Black Sea gas. So maybe we can also spare some of the capacity to Black Sea gas to also Balkan region as well. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is we've been talking essentially about what could be done this year, 2022, with perhaps a little bit going out to 2023. After next year, i.e. late 2023, 2024, the situation begins to change quite considerably. We get Sakarya coming online, initially probably small, but in the long run, it should deliver quite a bit, I understand. We should also be getting more from the Neptune field from Romania. The prospects look much better, and all of these prospects require these small, boring, mundane little connections and improve. They need the tweaking of the infrastructure rather than the laying of big new infrastructure. And it's doable. But if ever there was a time when you wanted everybody sitting in the room to sit down and say, this is what we'll do in the next few days. This is what we'll do in the next few months. This is what we'll do in the next few years, on a coordinated basis. Much of the work is in fact national. Things like developing the Sakarya field, that's a national concern for Turkey. Neptune, a national concern for Romania. But to get the full value from them, you need the extra connections. And that's why I'm talking about the small mundane stuff and the coordination. But Cenk raised a very good point about Russian gas and Turk Stream and the expansion of Turk Stream. There are several aspects that cast at least some doubt on all of this. First of all, what will be the political attitudes in the European Union to this? At the moment, the European Union has shown remarkable solidarity with regard to Ukraine, with one notable exception, Hungary. But what is striking is that Bulgaria has fallen in line when one might have expected Bulgaria to take a rather similar line to Hungary. And Bulgaria, of course, would be the key transit country for any expansion of the Turk Stream system into Serbia. So that's the key point. Is Bulgaria, as it were, finally starting to think more like an EU country than a post-Soviet country? The next thing is, has Russia got the desire or the money for such an expansion? The desire is perhaps the most important thing, because in the wake of, not in the wake of, depending on what the outcome is of the current imbroglio over pricing in rubles or pricing in euros and dollars, we do not know what the extent of Russian gas supplies to the European Union will be. And one thing is for sure, increased Russian supply to Serbia does not compensate for the loss of the European market. So I'm not sure the desire is there, and I'm not even sure that the money is necessarily there, but I will make one general point about money and the way the Russians operate their economy. I have heard it said, and I think it's fairly accurate, that Russian companies make profits on the construction of projects, not on the throughput that they carry, not on the operational side. So in other words, if you build a multi-billion-dollar pipeline, your company and your bosses can make a lot of money.
So you can just complete your, let's say, the words, and we can also.
Well, my thought was just simply that this simply means that Russians can make money on projects such as building a pipeline without necessarily worrying whether the gas flows through in terms that we would regard as being commercial.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that, if I were Mr. Putin and Gazprom in the beginning of Turk Stream negotiations, I can just gave the right to Turkey to re-export the Russian gas, changing the title of the gas in Turkey and sending to everywhere as the Turkish gas as well, before the Black Sea discovery. So it is easy right now, blending it, also selling it. So, but Russia and the Gazprom never let anyone to have a kind of re-export of their gas. And now, if there's a conflict for Nord Stream 2, personally, I'm not believing that conflict. In some point, it will be resolved, I guess, with the pressure from the Germany, I think. So Turkey will be in a critical position again in there. So it is really, really important. What Turkey needs, for myself, is that we have to be sure how the BOTAŞ system will gonna work if we use as a transit, let's say, for the volumes from Caspian or the other sources like Northern Iraq and the others. But you rightly mentioned also that we need the technologies to not to flare the gas, not to, it's the venting the gas. So when I was working for BOTAŞ, when we are calculating the interconnector Turkey-Greece, total capacity is talking about 3.6 BCM, maybe 11 BCM, somewhere, I don't know, in 2040 maybe. But in that time, the maximum figure is 11.7, 11.6 BCM of gas to Greece. When we were working for ITG, in Iraqi gas fields and the oil fields, I can say, they were flaring 12 BCM gas, equal to Turkey-Greece pipelines expected capacity in the future. They had some precautions in Iraq, but still they are flaring 6 BCM gas. It's still much. So we have to utilize and we have to collect all that gas sources in Turkey, and we can use mainly increasing the capacity of TANAP to 31 BCM, including 4, 5, I don't know, 8 BCM of Turkmen gas, and also some Azeri gas more after 2030, if they find something in the Caspian Sea as well. But you also underlined a very important, let's say, the topic in here. Iran, after years, just had a discovery in the Caspian Sea. This is very critical to work together with mainly with Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan, because they are sharing the southern part of the Caspian. And for me, it is also not clear the convention. Everyone was happy with the Caspian Sea Convention of 2018, but there is a kind of article in there by saying that a kind of environmental impact assessment has to be approved by all the states of Caspian Sea. So still, there's a big question mark for Trans-Caspian pipeline with that convention. But Russia never told anything for Kepes-Serdar issue solved. They changed the name to Dostluk. Maybe they can start with their own pipelines from offshore to their own lands. Then they can use that right of way for laying a pipe to Sangachal as well. I don't know, but I am not sure the Russians, let's say, the actions on it. They can only be kind of nice to Turkmenistan. Only Europe accepts to work with Nord Stream 2, I think. What is your opinion on that? I don't know.
I think it's very interesting what you're saying, that the Russians might, as it were, try to twin Caspian development plus Nord Stream 2. I'm just taking a note indeed of that because it's a good point to think about. I think it's too early to talk of that because I don't think right now, i.e. in the middle of the actual war, there is anything we can really talk about concerning cooperation with Russia.
Yeah.
But can I put that to one side for consideration later, because it's a very valid point for longer term consideration. What I think is interesting is about the Caspian Convention is that in practice, yes, it says environmental impacts have to be done, but there are transboundary pipelines already in the North Caspian between Kazakhstan and Russia.
Yes.
There are masses of pipelines laying in the Caspian Sea, some from very far out indeed, in much more difficult waters than the waters around Dostluk and between Maktamguli and the Azeri fields, Azeri Shirek and Neshli. One point, though, I'm glad you raised, so I don't think environmentally there is any particular problem. I would say any project to build a Trans-Caspian pipeline will have to have a proper environmental assessment, but there are plenty of reputable international companies who will do that. And I would not anticipate any problem whatsoever. Dostluk is interesting because the actual shortest connection between Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan passes through the Dostluk field. So any infrastructure developed to connect Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan also becomes a way, in a slightly longer time frame, of connecting Dostluk into the network system. So Dostluk in this sense is a help, not a hindrance. One key point is Azerbaijan itself. At the moment, in effect, all of Azerbaijan's export capacity comes from one field, Shah Deniz, 2 phases of it. More importantly, all of that gas is contracted under complex long-term contractual arrangements. So that has meant that because Azerbaijan has had less luck developing its other gas fields, Azerbaijan is actually gas short domestically. Hence the reason it began having a swap arrangement with Iran to get Turkmen Gas via Iran. And indeed, when we started, and I use the word we to mean Trans-Caspian Resources, the group that was promoting our little pipeline, we very much thought of the fact that Azerbaijan needed Turkmen gas for its own use as a key driver. Now it has changed, but even so, it is very difficult to see any quick ramp up of production of gas in Azerbaijan itself. BP has got various options. It is trying to develop the Shafak Aziman field. No, not trying, it is developing it. I mean, but that's still some years away. Azerbaijan has had problems with, I've forgotten the name of the field. 2 small fields, Alov, no, not Alov,
Umit Babek.
Umid Babek, thank you.
No.
One day I'll get the fields off by heart. Umid Babek has gone much slower than anybody expected. And Total working on the Absheron field is really only talking about using an exploration well as a possible production well. Not very much coming from it. There are other really good prospects. There's some more gas underneath the ACG oil field, deep level down.
Yeah.
And I think there probably is even more non-associated gas still to be found. But none of this comes on board quickly. It all takes time. So that's why Turkmenistan becomes so important right now, because it is able to do things quickly, because in effect, it's got production that is stranded or flared or vented. And if you want to look at the pictures showing how intense the flaring and venting is in Turkmenistan in terms of its overall production, it's very high indeed, thus contributing, of course, to climate change in a very bad way. Can I address the climate change issue?
Yeah, please.
We face a paradox. The world has never needed to get out of fossil fuels so urgently, and it's never needed supplies of fossil fuels so urgently. The first relates to climate change. The second relates to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So when I everything that I've been talking about now is short term. But try to put it in context. Essentially, every major assessment of energy requirements, including those to meet the demands of climate change and the net zero target by 2050, show a major role for gas until at least 2040 and a continuing role beyond that. At the moment, gas is also the quickest way to get out of coal and in some cases to get out of oil. It's still an extraordinarily good complement to renewables. It will remain a complement to renewables until such time as we can get large-scale energy storage, either in the form of batteries or in the form of hydro, or anything else we can do that allows us to take power from sunny days or windy days and store it from when it's cloudy, rainy, or the wind isn't blowing. Now that means gas is very, very important. So I make no apology for focusing on gas, but I do think it's very important to say that it must not be at the expense of the energy transition as a whole. We still need to be putting in as much cash into investment in renewables as possible, and as much resources into research and development of things like large-scale battery storage, carbon capture and storage, all the other elements that go towards making net zero. But I am talking about what we need in the next few days, weeks, and months.
We can add also nuclear fusion as well. So,
yes,
gas is really, just right now they understood that it is a kind of transition energy source. So you have to be very careful about when you are saying that no gas. Sorry, gas is required. It is clear because as soon as you need electricity, you need to use. As soon as you are talking about that the residential sector or whatever, you need gas, and in everywhere. So we are full of gas, and Turkey located 70% of its, let's say, the natural gas reserves of the world as a neighbor. So this is why one way or another. So the Iran can change, and Iran's position towards the West can change this picture as well. No one wants to create with their own hands a kind of rival to them, like Iran and like Azerbaijan and the others for Turkmen. Turkmen somehow unlucky because they forced to sell all of their two-thirds of the reserves at that time, 2003 agreement to Russia. And then they forced to sell the gas to China, and they didn't pay it. They didn't get a kind of profit, neither from Russia or the Chinese. So this is the right time to think about for the Turkmens to think hand in hand with the Azeris or the Iranians, but again, Iranians and Azeris, and also Turkey, a kind of option, but not bothering much to the own, let's say, the countries who has their own gas, like Iran and the Azerbaijan. So as you said, it can be started with a doable numbers, which is not bothering anyone for the short and mid-term. We are just talking about maybe 5 BCM, 6 BCM, most 8 BCM. Then you can have a kind of a decision to use it, the potash system first, increasing the capacity to 14 BCM. Then if there is a kind of gas from Iran, gas from Turkmenistan, collected with a new pipeline, let's say new Nabucco pipeline, which is ignored totally by the European Union in 2005-06 winter crisis of Ukraine and Russia as well. So it all reminds me my old days, and that how we met with John Roberts as well. We were in Sofia as the Nabucco team of potash, and my deputy Emre Engür was the speaker in that Sofia Energy conference or whatever. John Roberts with the same, let's say, the session with John Roberts. And John Roberts is very different guy, and by saying something different than the Europeans. And he just told that to us, we just listening him as well. He said that Turkey is different than the other gas countries. All former Soviet Union countries first be a kind of transit countries first. But Turkey first be a kind of natural gas country, then is aiming at to be a transit based on the natural gas infrastructure in all, let's say, the energy system. So it is really important, you know. And in that time, when John says this, European Union is talking about that very happy to have relations with Russia and Mrs. Merkel and Putin's, let's say, the gas, let's say, the deals. No one is blaming Russia. Everyone is happy with the Russian gas until that point, 2005 and 6 winter time. It is the first sign. Then European Union start to think about CDC and also rethink about Nabucco's importance. But Nabucco has a kind of, let's say, a luck in that. Unlucky because there is no source other than the Azerbaijan ready to be delivered via Turkey to European Union. So yes, we have Turkmens always in there. Iran, yes, in there. Iraq is in there, but we need a political stability. So there is no political stability and no Caspian Sea Convention, no nothing. Today, maybe after that Russian, let's say the Ukrainian war, we would think about that to having and utilizing that sources. Hope it changes Iranians' mind as well, because Iran is the key element of that, all that Central Asian stuff. And they need to be a part of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and the Karabakh stuff together with Iran. So this is why Iran has to give the hands to Azerbaijan, to Turkmenistan, and Turkey. But I am sure that they would like to be aiming at a kind of a balanced policy with the Russia as well. So it is also, they are not in a, let's say, in a simple position in front of the Russia. So it is also very hectic for Iran. But there are some opportunities. It has to be, let's say, revisited. But I am sure that US, European Union, Turkey, and Central Asia, and has to be worked together to understand, and also having a short, mid, and long-term policies, strategies, and whatever. You know, it's just a matter of engineering and the feasibility study, I think.
Cenk, thank you very much for bringing back happier days and memories of, not least of times working on the Nabucco issue, when you were trying to promote it and I was trying to argue, does it work? Does it not work? I was a journalist, and I have to say that I got some very good help from people involved with the Nabucco. Can I say one thing though? This brings back to a very important point in the European gas mix over the next weeks, months, and indeed years, which is how Turkey operates the gas system itself. At the moment, Turkey does not have a completely open gas market. It does not have the kind of through transit system that would have allowed the BOTASH system to carry gas from Azerbaijan to Greece, instead of which SOCAR wanted to have a system that it controlled, and so TANAP got built. But now we've got a radical set of changes, not least of which is the prospect of Sakarya coming on board. We've got a desperate need for European gas. You have already made the equation that up to 12 BCM of gas is flared and wasted in Iraq, and yet there is capacity in the old Turkey-Greece Komitini connection for 11.5 BCM. I mean, basically the same amount.
Yeah.
Now, given that companies like Genel Energy used to be extremely optimistic about producing gas in northern Iraq and getting it over the border into the Turkish system, given that there are high prices and that there are quite a lot of connections, although that's not to say that more would not be required, we should be able to reach the stage where at least gas from northern Iraq, essentially Kurdistan, but perhaps also from around Mosul, could be put into the Turkish system to ease the energy balance. even if that gas only serves southeastern Turkey, it relieves gas that would otherwise go to southeastern Turkey for delivery to other destinations further west.
Yeah, it is a good point, John.
So it would be, I would be interested in knowing, first of all, what is the spare capacity on the BOTASH system? What is the flexibility with regard to swaps? I mean, the Sirnak pipeline was completed some years ago to get gas from Iraq. So theoretically, that should not be too difficult. Are there any realistic developments in terms of getting gas from northern Iraq into Turkey? That's one question. Then the capacity issue is in BOTASH is another. And that brings on the last point. We have seen moves towards a political rapprochement between Turkey and Israel.
Yeah.
We don't know how far they will go or what the outcome will be. But there are definitely, you know, the two countries, the two governments are talking. Now, in many ways, Israel's East Mediterranean gas is stranded. It's got two ways it can go out. It can either be used in Israel itself, which is more or less overflowing now, with a little bit going over to Jordan, or it can go to the LNG terminals at Idku and Damietta in Egypt and be processed there. But there are capacity problems there, and there are, dare one say this, problems of mistrust between Israel and Egypt.
And they want to use for their resources as well.
Yeah. Or, and of course, any gas entering the Egyptian market is going into a market where there is still a large amount of gas that is provided domestically at subsidized rates. So you don't necessarily get a world price for the gas that you supply into that market. And if you do get a world price for it, then you're causing political ructions within Egypt. So for years we have known that in purely commercial terms, the logical market for Israeli gas abroad is southern Turkey.
Yeah.
Question, technically fairly straightforward, probably to build a 500-kilometer pipeline to connect the two. Politically, dynamite. Because of the whole question of Cyprus has to go through waters of Cyprus, the question of of Turkish recognition of the governments of Cyprus, all of the issues that one knows of, I could spend several hours and get nowhere discussing.
We maybe, you are right, but you know, we can use the Arab gas pipeline existing part, but it is stopping in this area. So you have to solve the Syrian question.
I was going to say, which problem do you think is easier to resolve, Syria or Cyprus? But seriously, I think it is just conceivable that you might be able to think about having a Cyprus. Are you speaking as well? Have I blocked you? I can't hear you. Can I hear you talking?
No, it's okay. I just put it in the, yeah, it's okay right now.
Right. No, I was just going to say that I think that it is perhaps just possible that with everything up in the air, with Turkey looking again at Europe, with Europe looking at Turkey, with gas being high on the agenda, maybe the chances of working out something for Cyprus have gone from 0.1% to 1%. Just something may be changing. Maybe we should just see whether we can price that bit open a little bit more, because you know there is a chance now, and the one thing I would say, the idea of a great big pipeline going from the Eastern Mediterranean to Crete, to Greece, to Italy, show me the money.
Yeah. It is just a dream, it's meaningless because as far as I know, Israel has only 8.5 BCM gas to export. Yeah. Maybe you can add up 1.15, whatever, reaching a 10 BCM. If there is no 10 BCM gas, the subsea passage or subsea pipeline from Israel to Turkey is meaningless as well. It's not economically viable. So this is why they have to solve the problem with that in Syria. But I'm sure that if Russia is there and if there's a conflict with Western world with Russia, they will never let Israeli gas or a working Arab gas pipeline connected to Turkey. So this is why it is a real dilemma, kind of chess with the 5 players each. So this is why it is very, very, let's say, the hectic situation. But at the end of the day, they understood that they need Turkey. If you are talking about your gas as Israel, or even it is true for Egypt, where they can just sell it, this gas. The distance-based Egyptian LNG will be the less costly distance-based LNG sales of to Turkey as well. So they're all rival. We have the capacity for 45 BCM regasification, and we can also open this as Turkey. We are using 64 BCM gas consumption. So, there is no chance for Israeli gas maybe to injecting into the TANAP. Why? Because as you mentioned, we have a kind of much more developed areas in the southern part. So we have CCGTs in there. Only 2 or 3 CCGTs is enough to take all the Israeli gas as well before TANAP. So this is why it is really, we have to talk about logically, politically, but commercially. And the European Union and Turkey has to have and sit together and have a nice plan all together, including everyone. No ignorance of anyone, but giving the, let's say, the role and the importance of Turkey to Turkey. This is the only thing I can say, because we can do everything. We are in the middle with Middle East, Northern Iraq, Iran, and Central Asia. We can be a kind of mediator, negotiator, or whatever, contributor, influencer, whatever, if you will, you accept. Yeah, we can be anything for everyone.
I think though what it does need is for Turkey to become a real, genuine gas hub. And that means having an open domestic market as well as an open international market.
This is why it is the right time to talk about the liberal market, liberal gas market. And we have FGAS, and we open up the spot pipe gas, let's say the regulations. We already started to booking the capacities. Right at the moment, only Botash and sometimes Gazprom FLT is just having this, but it is there. And we have 2 angles from Greece and also Bulgaria. So we have to develop the trade, gas trade in Turkey, and gas trade opportunities, and the inclusion of the private sector, especially in the LNG business, and maybe a construction of the pipelines, small pipelines, by the private sector and their partners, which is aiming at to reach out Southeastern Europe via Turkey, or to Ukraine, to Poland, or whatever, So we need more liberal market.
One of the most striking developments in Turkey has been in the last 30 years, its transition from being an entirely state-focused economy into being a really vibrant mixed economy. Yeah. Still large-scale state enterprises and services, but enormously effective private sector. Yeah. And to do that within energy would be, continue a transformation in a very positive manner. So I think, there are some really good sides. I don't know what else I've got to add, other than that you are.
Yeah, I can just say that.
Really well placed.
Yeah, we can just say that, yes, gas is not a potato. It is a foreign affairs tool of Turkey as well. It is understandable, but it doesn't mean that each and every segment and each and every portion of that gas sector has to be with the state. I'm just talking about creating a level playing ground to the private sector, just by naming it. If you are consuming 65 BCM, you can just open a kind of space, let's say 15 BCM for the private sector, LNG and pipe, it doesn't matter. Just give it, then just see it and don't distort the market prices. Just let the market just do it. It's it's simple. Just to see the capacity of the private sector as well. It is very important.
I would make another point. It's a point that I'm essentially thinking more of a French model than the British model. We have a disaster in Britain at the moment because the high international prices of gas are being passed on more or less directly to consumers, so that our electricity bills are going up by 54%. Yeah. Absolutely astonishing. Whereas in France, they have regulated that the increase in energy prices will be no more than 4%. So one of the things we're going to have to do, here is me saying, I want you to open up your market, which means international prices, and yet there has to be protection for the consumer at the same time, so that you do not have large elements of the population descending into energy poverty. Now, I'm not coming up with an answer as to how you do that, but I am saying you have to do it, and you have to do it in a way that does not embed a subsidy principle into the system, because once you have subsidies that are embedded, it becomes very difficult to get rid of them. But somehow you need to open up the market and you need to protect the consumer. Yeah. And I wish you joy in doing both of those things.
It is a kind of hot potato in my hands. So thank you very much, John. So our time is just over right now, I think. If you would like to add a kind of word or whatever, you can do it. And otherwise, I would like to thank on behalf of ANKASAM and ANKASAM President for your very good points, open the mind and, enlighten us. Thank you very much for your, let's say, the time for that, to speak with us. Hope to see you again another webinar with us, with some nice topics to discuss with you. Always good.
Cenk, as ever, it's been an absolute delight, and thank you. I'm not sure I really should thank you, because now I have to do a whole lot of thinking, and I don't want to. It's a Saturday.
yeah, it is a Saturday.
Thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of the weekend yourself.